Hey everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at the performance of Diablo 4 running on the ASUS ROG Ally, as well as a comparison to the Steam Deck, running the same settings. As always, I start these optimization guide videos off by showing the settings I am using. One thing to note that is if you set your UMA frame buffer to 8GB, you will be limited to using only medium textures due to the system RAM limitation. If you want just my settings, then thanks for watching. If you want to know how I got here, then I implore you to watch further. Just really quickly, I would like to thank each and every one of you. Whether you've liked or subscribed or even simply watched my videos, thank you. We have now passed over 2,000 subscribers, and as of last night, we were officially accepted into the YouTube Partner Program. With that, I am hoping that any money made from my videos will be put directly back into the channel. This would take form of purchasing products to make content with, or upgrading general gear and testing equipment. Again, thank you for sticking with me as I navigate YouTube. As well, I have unofficially launched my Discord channel, link in the description if you're interested. This is a very bare bones server at the moment, but as I get more familiar with the mod tools, hopefully it'll turn into a more kind of strong community driven channel. Again, if you're interested. To start things off, my methodology for testing and optimizing Diablo 4 was to start off using the Ally. I set what I thought were reasonable settings relative to the hardware and TDP range, 15 to 30 watts. Given that there is no benchmarking tool built into Diablo 4, as well as it being an online-only game, performance could potentially be wildly different in your case. All of my tests were completed on a hardwired Ethernet connection to reduce as much variability in internet strength as possible. All tests were performed while plugged into the wall as well. My custom benchmark route was done in KYOVASHAD. This was due to it being the most stable area for my tests, for slight variances when changing graphical and TDP options. This was not designed to be a stress benchmark test or an extreme stress test. That would come in the form of heavy combat encounters. However, those are even less repeatable than my KYOVASHAD run. I understand fully that these frame rate averages are not indicative of gameplay, however, KYOVASHAD is a relatively intense area for the GPU and CPU, more so to the CPU. These tests are more focused on the differences of setting the UMA frame buffer to auto 4GB or 8GB and its relation to performance for the ASUS ROG Ally and 1GB versus 4GB on the Steam Deck. The UMA frame buffer is how much system memory is allocated to your GPU. For example, if you set 4GB, you would have 4GB of video memory and 12GB of system memory on the Steam Deck and the Ally, because they both have 16GB of system memory. This can help or hinder performance in some games. Typically, if the game is a VRAM heavy game, you will want to set it to 8GB. However, I will always suggest you test these things on your own to see which one best performs in your use case. Without any further rambling, let's get into it. Alrighty, so getting into our KYOVASHAD benchmark run, just understanding the graph here, so the purple is FPS average, orange is 1% low, and red is 0.1% lows. We can see here that I'm testing the ROG Ally, an auto 4GB and 8GB UMA frame buffer. For now on, I'll just reference it to the VRAM buffer. And we can see here we're testing at 30 watt 1080p FSR performance. So going to auto versus 4GB, we can see that there's really not too much to write home about, except the fact that we're going to 4GB, we can see that the 0.1% lows were higher, although this is obviously likely due to test run variants of characters running around or whatever. It is an online game, so I can't perfectly predict everything that's going to happen. But again, these are 3-run averages, so it's not just one test and done. So we can see here that at least over the 3-run average, it was consistently lower in the 0.1% lows set to auto. Moving over to 8GB, we can see here that the FPS average got a healthy boost by 10 overall average, and we can see here the 0.1% lows were actually lower, but more in line with auto, and the 1% lows were about the same as auto and 4GB. Moving on to the next one, we have 1080p at 25 watt. Same thing, 8GB, we have more performance in the FPS average, but the 1% lows were actually, the 0.1% lows were better, but the 1% lows were worse. And then moving on to 19 watt, so I call this like my mobile kind of overclock range, 1080p FSR performance, we can see same thing. 8GB, we were getting higher FPS averages, but lower 1% lows. But now the distance between the two is dwindling. Now it's only about a 5 FPS difference, as opposed to the 10 that we saw in 25 and 30, or sorry, not 10, 8 in 25. But yeah, so you can see here that going through the performance charts, the less watt that you're throwing at it and the less intense graphical things that are going on, the less reliable 8GB of VRAM buffer is, because now we're actually getting worse performance than 4GB and even auto. So we can see here that 4GB we're actually pulling ahead with the 58.5 FPS average, the 1% lows, and 0.1% lows were actually fairly in line with the rest. But again, 8GB is trailing behind here. Now, just for fun, going over to 720p, we got FSR off this time, and 30 watt. So same thing, KYOVASHAD run, 3-run test. We have a 68.1 FPS average for auto and a 72 FPS average for 4GB and 71.9, almost 72, 8GB run there. But we can see that the 1% lows with 8GB VRAM buffer are abysmal compared to auto and 4GB, with 4GB kind of taking the crown here. Now moving over to 720p, 25 watt, we can see that same thing, auto, 4GB and 8GB. 8GB actually pulled ahead in this one, where it was actually worse off in 30 watt. But again, the 1% lows were abysmal compared to 4 and auto. Again, this time though, auto pulled out ahead with the 1% lows, but they were still above 40, which is phenomenal in my opinion. You want to keep it above 30 at least, but 40 even better. Now moving over to my mobile overclock of 19 watts, 720p, we can see here that again the 8GB is not really offering us much performance boost here and is hindering our 1% lows quite significantly by pretty well half. Well, not half, but whatever. Moving on to 15 watt 720p, we can see that we have the 4GB pulling out ahead here in FPS average, with the 1% lows and 0.1% lows being dead on the exact same with the auto. And yes, I did double check this. I did not enter these incorrectly. They are the correct numbers because I was kind of thrown through a loop there for myself. But now going on over to 8GB, we can see that we got a 52 FPS average and even worse 8GB 1%, lows. Now I decided to do a 12 watt run on 720p just for the fun of it. I wouldn't honestly advise this in gameplay scenarios. It was very choppy, very stuttery, but we can see here that the best performance was in 4GB VRAM buffer mode. So we can see that honestly for this one, unless you're going over 1080 or going to 1080p, setting up the graphics high, 8GB UMA frame buffer doesn't seem like it's going to help with this one. Now moving over to the Steam Deck, using the same settings. This one we're just testing at 800p because you can't set the resolution to 720p in game for whatever reason. So we're just testing 800p, 15 watt, 1GB versus 4GB, and then we have FSR on and off as well. So we can see here for the 1GB on the top and 4GB on the bottom, FSR off, we're getting a 54 FPS average, and 4GB we're getting 55.8. Again, this is a 3-run test. Moving on to the 1% lows, the 1% lows were worse on 4GB actually compared to 1GB, and the 0.1% lows were quite a bit worse as well. Now moving over to FSR performance on, we can see that the 1% lows were brought up higher and the FPS average was obviously brought up higher. But this time now, the 4GB was pulling up ahead with the FPS averages. So curiously, yeah, we can see this pulling up like by quite a bit actually, like 4 FPS there. So at the end of the day, I mean, these settings are good and workable on the Steam Deck, don't get me wrong, but you're obviously not going to get the Ally performance in this. You could consider dropping your texture quality down a bit lower, maybe even dropping the physics quality and things like that if you want to get blazing fast speeds. But for a game like Diablo, honestly, I think 40 to 60 FPS is the perfect range for it. As you can see from the data provided, the ASUS ROG Ally does not appear to need your UMA frame buffer set any higher than 4GB. The only case where this was a viable option and offered more performance was when we were doing our 1080p high TDP performance benchmarks. This would be due to resolution difference, with 1080p obviously needing more GPU resources to run as opposed to 720p. In general, gameplay and combat, I did definitely notice more moments of stutter on 1080p regardless of UMA frame buffer, with 8GB typically offering less 1% and 0.1% lows. As such, my recommendation would be to change your settings accordingly. What I mean by that is to, in your mind, look at the ROG Ally as a Steam Deck Pro or a Nintendo Switch Pro, with the idea that when docked you would get better performance. Except in this case, we have access to a lot of extra power, not including the XG mobile GPU line. For example, I would always recommend running 720p while in handheld mode. While running in 720p without FSR, we are left with a very clean looking image, even without using Radeon Super Resolution. Speaking of Radeon Super Resolution, I want to clear up some misinformation out there. I've seen claims online specifically about Diablo 4 that while running 720p in RSR results in clean, crisp images. However, RSR does not work with Diablo 4, and I'll elaborate on why. In order for RSR to work, you need to have the screen resolution, or system resolution, set to 1080p or your desired output resolution. Then you would set the in-game resolution to 720p. The game must be in full screen mode as well. This would then scale the image up from 720p to 1080p. However, in the case of Diablo 4, because we cannot change the in-game resolution independently from the system resolution, meaning you need to change to 720p through the control center, with that, both the resolution for the screen and in-game are matched at 720p, therefore cancelling out RSR. With that cleared up, I would still recommend running 720p on handheld and then just adjust your TDP accordingly to your playtime. You should have a pretty solid 30 to 40 FPS experience in 15 watt mode, while gaining even more going into my mobile OC mode of 19 watts. I would not recommend going any lower than 15 watt. When docked, I would recommend you just max out your speeds at 25, 25, 35 unless your dock can support the full 30 watt mode, as you have no concerns with battery life. I would recommend that you set up a custom fan profile as well, as the stock ones tend to cause the Ally to overheat, so just bumping it up even a little bit or just setting it to the third option in the fan profile menu is perfect. And now getting into the Steam Deck performance, there's obviously less data. I decided to keep it at stock settings and then just test FSR on and off, as well as changing the UMA frame buffer. However, the only differences that were really observed were when turning FSR on and off. As such, I would recommend you leave your Steam Deck at whatever frame buffer you prefer, as there does not seem to be any major performance implications by doing so. Well, there you have it. Diablo 4 optimization guide done. I know not everyone will agree with my choices in settings or even testing methodology, and that is fine. I would suggest if you do not agree with any of this, to use these settings as a starting point and then evolve them from there. Texture details could be turned down further if desired, and other settings as well. But that will do it for this one. If you have any more requests for games to optimize or any other video idea recommendations, don't be shy and let me know in the comments, even if it is just to call me a jerk. Thanks for taking the time to watch this one, and I hope everyone has a great day slaying demons.